Hello, welcome to this special virtual cadre session. I am Nan Bai, PhD researcher at TU Delft Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment. In this video, I'm going to present the result of a research using agent-based simulation to evaluate the so-called tourism carrying capacity, or TCC, of the Palace Museum, also known as the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. Our paper suggests a computational workflow to help plan for a finer and more effective heritage management practice. By finer, I mean a finer spatial-temporal resolution, which can be more detailed and more accurate. Currently, I am a PhD researcher of the EU Heriland project. The authors of this paper are Nan Bai, Pirouz, Nourian, and Pereira from the Department of Architectural Engineering and Technology, TU Delft, and Anping from Department of Architectural Heritage in the Palace Museum. This research was supported by the Palace Museum and was undertaken during the summer of 2019. Being one of the most important cultural heritage properties and a symbol of Imperial China and an archetypical example of building style of traditional Chinese architecture, the Palace Museum in Beijing, China has already been inscribed in the UNESCO World Heritage List as early as 1987. In the past decades, the Palace Museum has always been seeking more effective ways of managing this 72-hectare complex, providing the tourists a better experience while conserving the heritage properly. One of the most important actions it took was to transform to online ticket reservation and to set the upper bound of daily visitors to a limit of 80,000 in 2015, which significantly improved the overall condition both for the heritage and for the visitors. Located in the northwestern part of the whole palace, the Hall of Mental Cultivation, or Yangxingdian in Chinese, has served as the residential and working place for 8 emperors in Qing dynasty for more than 300 years. Starting from 2016, a 5-year-long research conservation project took place in the hall, preparing for its official reopening, celebrating the 600-year anniversary of the Palace Museum this year in 2020. The overall area being around 7.7 thousand square meter, and the building area being nearly 3.9 thousand square meter. The indoor areas were not accessible for visitors long before the conservation, due to severe problems occurring in architectural elements and exhibited furniture, and the potential damage that mass tourism may have caused to the heritage. Even though the tourists were only able to see the outdoor areas, far more visitors than the complex could actually hold were visiting the hall daily before the conservation started, causing a lot of problems. Theoretically, for the limited visiting areas in that time, a maximum of 215 people should be allowed in the hall at any moment. Yet, from the real-time data, we can see that for the most of the time, this number reached more than 500 and even 800 in peak hours. The overcrowded conditions of the hall were too risky for the heritage management and also led to a rather limited and unpleasant touring experience for the visitors. Therefore, the Palace Museum considered to use the chance of this conservation project to discover more effective management and touring alternative for the period after reopening. One standard which has already been applied by many tourist destinations and heritage properties in China is the so-called tourism carrying capacity, or TCC, which is by definition the maximum number of tourists that can be contained in a certain destination area. 2 variations of TCCs are actually mentioned by literature and practitioners, namely the maximum TCC aiming at not harming the heritage site and a suitable TCC trying to ensure a reasonably comfortable experience and perception for visitors. However, the traditional TCC standard is a static magic number calculation based on the free visit mode, where the visitors are less regulated. As for the new program, the Palace Museum inclines for a more controlled one-way guided tour with the aid of audio or mobile guide, while all the visitors have to make a reservation on the time slot for the visit beforehand. This asks for an alternative tour program with dynamic TCC's calculation in regard to the continuous tourist flow. In response, that is, in order to seek an ideal balance between visitors' experience and the safety of the heritage, we propose to formulate the dynamic touring program as an optimization problem. A total of 19 important spots are considered for the visitors to stay at. The objective of the problem is to maximize the daily visitors amount by adjusting 1. A variable called tau, which it describes the lag time for any visitors to start the tour or the temporal distance of any two visitors. 2. T sub I, denoting the permitted staying time considering the guiding commentary and the free observation by each tourist at the highest spot of the tour. And 3. T sub D, denoting the daily opening time duration of the hall, subject to the following constraints: that firstly, for any spot, the visitors present at any moment should be less than the maximum number required by TCC in regard to the area of the spot, and secondly, the total visiting time for the visitors should be reasonable and not too short. As the opening time for the hall is determined to last for 7.5 hours daily, and the total staying time for visitors should be at least half an hour, based on the area and TCC standard of all the spots. The lag time total can be calculated as 6 seconds, and later an initial permitted staying time program for each of the 19 spots can also be solved accordingly, as is shown in the table. The variables all given, the daily visitors can be determined to be 4,200. Practically speaking, one critical issue is unsolved even after getting the solution, the tau value, meaning the lag time for any visitors to start the tour is too short and almost impossible to realize for the real-world management practice. Visitors have to reserve a time window to enter the complex, and this time window can only be possible if it is longer than, for example, 15 minutes. We can assume that the arrival of all visitors follow a Poisson distribution. This entails that there is still going to be peaks and valleys for the tourist flow in a 15-minute periodicity. The peaks, however, may mean overcrowdedness for visitors and result in harming the heritage. One good news is that the hall is actually divided into inner yard and outer yard. While we have to ensure that visitors entering the inner yard follow exactly the lag time requirement, the larger and less vulnerable outer yard can function as buffer zone and help smoothing the peaks gradually like dams, with the help of electric gates to slow down the flow rate. 4 spots in the outer yard can function as such controlling spots. Accordingly, we have to make sure that for any controlling spot, there won't be too long of a queue. This is, however, very hard to verify through pure mathematical calculation. Furthermore, real-world visitors may act more randomly without obeying the touring program entirely all along the tour. Considering the complexity of all those uncertainties, we decided to use a computational simulation to verify and help adjust our intended touring program. For this purpose, we used Thunderhead Pathfinder, an agent-based simulator originally developed for evacuation in the emergencies. The touring program following the initial estimation is given to the software as inputs. The behavioral pattern for the agents staying at each spot is assumed to obey a normal distribution, allowing for a certain degree of uncertainty. Moreover, 10% of the agents are supposed to have a deviated behavioral pattern, in the sense of staying longer at each spot, representing some extra curious visitors, people like myself. There are 3 main goals for the simulation to verify about the touring program. Firstly, it is aimed to find out whether for any spot at any time, the instant visitors could go above the number bounded by the maximum TCC. Secondly, it is to ensure that the peaks and valleys for the tourist flow caused by a longer reservation time window could be finely controlled and smoothed along the tour. Thirdly, it is to help find out whether there may be extremely long queues at any spot. In this research, we utilize the simulation tool as a feedback mechanism. If any of the requirements at any spot is probably not going to be satisfied, the touring program would be adjusted accordingly and tested iteratively. The 2 animations below shows the example performance of a specific spot before and after adjustment. By adjusting the flow rate allowed for the gate, the long queue outside the room is significantly relieved. After rounds of simulation and adjustment, the 3 requirements are all successfully met. As for the first requirement, we can observe that for all the rooms and outdoor spaces, the numbers of agents present are always below the calculation based on maximum TCC, and for most of the rooms, the agents are always fluctuating around the amount based on the prescribed suitable TCC, which means that the density is not only comfortable for the visitors, but also safe enough for the heritage, while the spaces are being used effectively. As for the peak control, in the graph shown here, the yellow line plots the number of agents entering the complex, strongly featuring periodical spikes. However, after implementing the control mechanism that entails embedding 4 checkpoints and gates in the outer yard, the number of agents entering the inner yard represented by blue line have already converged to a relatively steady state, satisfying the required 6-second lag time tau described several pages ago. As for the third requirement regarding the length of the queues, it can also be observed from the final simulation round based on the proposed adjusted values and the implemented mechanisms that there will be probably no more long queues, thus relieving visitor experiences as well as alleviating potential damage to the heritage. And overall performance of the simulation model after adjustment is shown as this animation. For a stable state in the middle of the typical day, the instant number of agents remaining in the complex ranges between 300 and 400, which by the way corresponds to the result of a traditional calculation based on the accessible area of the inner and outer yard and the corresponding static suitable TCC standard. However, the situation seems far better than the typical days before conservation. As a conclusion, we provide an adjusted touring program as the main deliverable of this research. For each of the 19 spots along the tour, different ranges of staying time are allowed. For the spots in outer yard, visitors have more freedom to stay longer and shorter than the suggested time. On the contrary, for the spots in inner yard, the special temporal regulation for the visitors shall be stricter. We are happy to announce that this touring program is already approved by the department heads of the Palace Museum as a recommendation to be implemented for planning the exhibition programs. We intend to use tracking tools such as Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, sensors, CCTV monitors, and similar technologies after official reopening of the hall in order to figure out human movement pattern in reality and validate our model more precisely. To finish this presentation, there's one more comment to add to it. At first glance, our conclusion that the daily reservation limit of the hall of mental cultivation should be 4,200 seemed far too small compared to the previous daily visitor of around 15,000 and the daily limit of 80,000 in the palace. And it was even questioned by the director when this research was first conducted and presented. However, as the Palace Museum reopened its gates in May after closure of almost 3 months due to coronavirus, the daily visitor limit was set to 5,000 for the whole palace. This may also suggest the chance to initialize a new era of finer heritage management practice in the Palace Museum. This time finer also in the sense of finesse, impressive delicacy, and skill for the managers, leaving more time for reflective visitors to enjoy the tour. Thank you all for listening.